Welcome to my channel, a place where ideas turn into action and knowledge becomes power. In today's world, we're surrounded by information, but often what we really need is wisdom we can apply in our daily lives. That's exactly what this channel is all about. Here, you'll find inspiring book summaries, practical lessons from psychology and success science, and easy strategies to build better habits. Whether it's transforming your morning routine, understanding how habits control our decisions, or learning timeless lessons from the world's best thinkers, my goal is to make every video a spark that helps you move forward. I believe small changes can create big results. A single new habit can reshape your health, career, and relationships. A fresh perspective can shift the way you see challenges. Knowledge, when shared, doesn't just inform us, it transforms us. This channel isn't about lectures or long theories. It's about short, engaging, and powerful ideas that you can put into practice right away. Each video is designed to give you clarity, motivation, and tools to create a better version of yourself, step by step, day by day. So, if you're ready to grow, to break old patterns, and to unlock the power of habits and ideas that truly work, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey. Together, let's turn knowledge into action and action into lasting change. Welcome to the start of something new. Chapter 1, The Habit Loop, How Habits Work. Charles Duhigg begins the journey into habits by reminding us that much of what we do each day happens almost without thinking. We wake up, brush our teeth, make coffee, check our phones, or drive to work, and often, we can't even remember making the decision to do these things. That's because our brains are designed to create shortcuts, patterns that free up mental energy. These shortcuts are what Duhigg calls habits, and they follow a simple but powerful cycle known as the habit loop. This loop has 3 stages. First comes the cue, the trigger that tells your brain it's time to go into automatic mode. Second is the routine, the behavior that follows, which can be physical, emotional, or mental. Third comes the reward, the positive outcome or feeling that reinforces the behavior, teaching your brain to remember the loop for the future. To bring this to life, Duhigg tells the story of Claude Hopkins, a marketing pioneer from the early 1900s. At that time, dental hygiene in America was a disaster. Tooth decay was so widespread that soldiers in World War I were declared unfit for duty because of their teeth. Hardly anyone brushed regularly. Hopkins was tasked with promoting a new product, Pepsodent toothpaste. Instead of relying on dry claims, Hopkins built his campaign around the habit loop. The cue was simple, he told people to run their tongue across their teeth and feel the film of plaque. The routine was brushing with Pepsodent. The reward was not just clean teeth but also a tingling, fresh sensation and the promise of beauty and confidence. People didn't just want clean teeth, they began to crave that cool, satisfying feeling. The results were astonishing. Within a few years, daily toothbrushing went from a rare activity to a nationwide ritual. By the 1930s, Pepsodent was one of the best-selling products in the world, not because the toothpaste was revolutionary, but because Hopkins had cleverly built a habit loop that millions of people repeated every day. The science behind this is equally compelling. Once a habit forms, the brain essentially hands control over to the basal ganglia, the area that manages automatic routines. The decision-making parts of the brain quiet down, conserving energy. This is why you can sometimes drive home without remembering the trip, your brain was running on habit. It's efficient, but it also means habits, once formed, are stubborn and long-lasting. Duhigg makes one thing very clear, once established, habits never truly disappear. They remain in the brain, ready to resurface when the right cue appears. That's why it's so easy to slip back into old patterns like smoking, overeating, or procrastinating. But the good news is that habits can be changed. By identifying the cue, experimenting with the routine, and keeping the reward intact, we can reshape the loop to work in our favor. The lesson from this first chapter is powerful. Habits shape almost everything we do, often invisibly. But they are not destiny. By understanding the habit loop, cue, routine, reward, we gain the ability to change even the most stubborn behaviors. Chapter 2, The Craving Brain, How to Create New Habits. In Chapter 1, Charles Duhigg introduced the habit loop, cue, routine, reward. But if habits are so simple, why do some become unstoppable forces in our lives while others fade away after a few days? Why does one person stick to their morning jog for years while another quits after a week? The answer lies in something deeper than the loop itself: craving. Habits don't just exist because of cues and rewards. They become powerful when our brains begin to expect and crave the reward before it arrives. This craving is the glue that makes habits stick. Without craving, the loop falls apart. With craving, the brain goes on autopilot, pushing us back toward the habit again and again. To explain, Duhigg returns to the story of Claude Hopkins and Pepsodent toothpaste. When Hopkins launched his now famous campaign, it wasn't only the advertisements that made brushing a nationwide habit, it was the feeling that brushing created. Hopkins added ingredients that left a cool, tingling sensation in the mouth. That sensation didn't actually make teeth cleaner, but it created a reward people began to crave. They didn't just want clean teeth, they wanted the tingle. Soon, they anticipated it. They craved it. That craving turned brushing from a chore into a daily ritual, and within a generation, dental hygiene had transformed across America. Duhigg then shifts to a modern story: Febreze. When Procter & Gamble developed Febreze in the 1990s, they thought it would change the world. It could eliminate bad odors from furniture, clothes, and pets. In test homes, people sprayed it on smelly couches, and the odors disappeared. The company expected $1 billion success. But when Febreze hit the market, sales were dismal. The problem was simple: the people who needed Febreze the most didn't notice the smells. Smokers had grown used to the scent of cigarettes, pet owners didn't notice dog odor. Without a cue, without an awareness of the problem, there was no craving, no loop. P&G almost gave up, but then they discovered something remarkable. A few women were using Febreze in a different way. Instead of spraying it to eliminate odor, they sprayed it at the end of their cleaning routines. After making the bed or vacuuming the carpet, they spritzed Febreze as a finishing touch. The scent became linked to the satisfaction of a job well done. The cue was cleaning, the routine was spraying Febreze, and the reward was the fresh smell that signaled completion. Soon, people began to crave that scent. It wasn't about odor anymore, it was about closure, about pride in a clean home. When P&G leaned into this craving in their marketing, sales exploded, and Febreze became a household name. The science backs this up. In experiments at MIT, researchers placed rats in mazes. At first, the rats explored randomly, sniffing corners until they stumbled upon chocolate. But as the experiment repeated, their brains started firing differently. When they heard the click of the maze door, the cue, their brains lit up with anticipation. They expected chocolate. Even before they got the reward, their brains experienced a surge of dopamine, the neurotransmitter tied to craving and pleasure. This anticipation drove them straight to the chocolate faster each time. Humans work the same way. When you crave a morning coffee, the craving begins long before you sip it, when you hear the machine gurgle or smell the aroma. When smokers crave a cigarette, the anticipation of relief comes the moment they step outside, not just when they inhale. Craving is what transforms the loop from a casual routine into an unshakable habit. Duhigg explains that this has profound implications for building new habits. If you want to start exercising, it's not enough to say, "I'll go to the gym." You must create and highlight a craving, the endorphin rush after a workout, the feeling of accomplishment, or even a reward like a smoothie afterward. If you want to eat healthier, you must learn to crave the boost of energy and self-confidence that comes from nourishing food. Without craving, new habits feel like chores. With craving, they become something you look forward to. The lesson of this chapter is that the anticipation of the reward, the craving, is what powers habits. This is why brushing teeth, drinking coffee, smoking, or even checking our phones becomes so automatic. Our brains light up with anticipation before we act, pushing us into the routine. If we can harness this principle, we can design new, positive habits that actually last. Chapter 3: The Golden Rule of Habit Change: Why Transformation Occurs. By now, Charles Duhigg has shown us that habits follow a loop of cue, routine, and reward, and that craving is the engine that powers them. But this chapter tackles the big question: can habits actually be changed? After all, anyone who has tried to quit smoking, break a sugar addiction, or stop procrastinating knows how stubborn habits can be. The truth is, habits never disappear completely. They're etched into the brain permanently, waiting for the right cue. But they can be reshaped. And the secret lies in what Duhigg calls the golden rule of habit change: keep the same cue and reward, but swap in a new routine. To bring this to life, Duhigg explores the world of Alcoholics Anonymous, AA. On the surface, AA doesn't look like a scientific program. There's no medicine, no therapy, no brain scans. Just meetings, sponsors, and prayers. Yet millions have found sobriety through AA, and researchers began asking why. What they discovered was that AA doesn't erase the alcoholic's habit loop. The cue, stress, loneliness, or celebration, is still there. The reward, relief, companionship, or escape is still desired. What AA changes is the routine. Instead of drinking, members go to a meeting, call a sponsor, or pray. The loop is preserved, but the behavior in the middle is swapped. Over time, this rewiring becomes automatic. But there's another ingredient. AA works not only because it changes routines but also because it provides belief. Recovering alcoholics often describe moments when they felt powerless but believed they could change with the support of their community and faith. Belief makes the rewired loop stronger. Without it, old routines can creep back in during stress or crisis. With it, the new routine holds. Duhigg also tells the story of Tony Dungy, an NFL coach famous for transforming struggling teams. Dungy believed that instead of teaching complex strategies, he needed his players to react out of habit, instantly and without hesitation. He trained them to recognize the same cues, how an opposing team lined up, and replace old routines with simpler, more effective ones. For example, instead of guessing what play was coming, defenders were trained to respond immediately to specific movements. The reward remained the same, stopping the opponent and winning, but the routine in the middle was changed. Over time, these new habits became automatic, and Dungy's teams began to win consistently. One powerful example was the Indianapolis Colts' comeback in a playoff game. When stress was at its highest and most teams would crack under pressure, Dungy's players stuck to their new habits. They didn't overthink, they relied on automatic responses. The golden rule was alive on the field: same cues, same rewards, but new routines that led to victory. The science is clear. Because habits are stored in the brain, they never vanish. That's why relapses happen. A smoker might quit for years but suddenly light up again when stressed, because the old loop was triggered. But if you've built a new routine into that loop, the old one can be replaced. For instance, instead of lighting a cigarette when anxious, you go for a walk, call a friend, or chew gum. The craving for relief, reward, is still satisfied, but in a new way. Duhigg closes the chapter with a hopeful message: anyone can change their habits, but it's not about erasing the old ones. It's about hijacking the loop and giving it a new routine. Keep the cue. Keep the reward. But choose a new path in between. And when paired with belief that change is possible, often reinforced by community, transformation becomes lasting. Chapter 4: Keystone Habits. Which habits matter most? By now, Charles Duhigg has shown us how habits form and how they can be changed. But here he introduces something even more powerful: the idea that not all habits are equal. Some habits are like dominoes: tip them over, and they cause a chain reaction, reshaping other behaviors and influencing entire lives or organizations. Duhigg calls these keystone habits. Keystone habits are special because they spark ripple effects that extend far beyond themselves. They don't just change a single routine, they transform entire systems of habits. To show this, Duhigg tells the story of Paul O'Neill, who became the CEO of Alcoa, one of the world's largest aluminum companies, in 1987. When O'Neill took over, Alcoa was struggling. Everyone expected him to talk about profits, efficiency, or market strategy. Instead, in his very first speech to investors, he announced, "I want to talk to you about worker safety." The audience was stunned. Safety? That sounded irrelevant. Some investors thought he was crazy. But O'Neill understood the power of a keystone habit. By focusing relentlessly on worker safety, he would force the company to rethink its processes, improve communication, and build a culture of excellence. He demanded that every accident be reported immediately and investigated. To make this possible, managers had to share information openly, respond quickly, and adopt new routines. Slowly, these new behaviors spread across the organization. Productivity improved, communication strengthened, and Alcoa became one of the safest and most profitable companies in the world. This is the magic of keystone habits. They unlock new patterns that might have seemed impossible before. Safety wasn't just about avoiding injuries, it became the foundation for discipline, collaboration, and innovation. By focusing on one seemingly small area, O'Neill transformed an entire corporation. Keystone habits also exist in our personal lives. One of the most common examples is exercise. Research shows that people who start exercising, even once a week, often unconsciously begin changing other habits too. They start eating better, becoming more productive at work, smoking less, and even managing their finances better. Why? Because the habit of exercise creates a mindset of discipline and self-improvement that spills over into other areas. The single habit becomes a catalyst for wider change. Another example is family dinners. Studies show that families who eat dinner together regularly often see their children perform better in school, develop stronger social skills, and avoid risky behaviors. The dinner itself isn't magical, but it sets in motion other positive patterns: better communication, healthier eating, closer bonds, and stronger routines. Duhigg also notes that keystone habits create what psychologists call small wins. A small win is a simple success that builds momentum and confidence. For example, a person who starts jogging once a week feels successful and is more likely to add another healthy habit, like eating vegetables or waking up earlier. Each small win reinforces the next. Over time, small wins accumulate into major transformations. The science of keystone habits shows that change is rarely about willpower alone. It's about finding the right habit, the one that has the power to ripple into every part of life. Keystone habits act like levers, move them, and entire structures shift. Friends, keystone habits matter most because they spark chain reactions. They don't just change what you do, they change how you see yourself, how you behave in other areas, and how systems around you operate. If you want transformation, don't tackle everything at once. Find your keystone habit, and let it reshape the rest. Chapter 5: Starbucks and the Habit of Success, When Willpower Becomes Automatic. In this chapter, Charles Duhigg explores one of the most powerful keystone habits of all: willpower. Research shows that self-discipline is a stronger predictor of academic performance than IQ, and that people with willpower tend to do better in almost every area of life, from health to finances to relationships. But here's the surprising part: willpower is not simply a character trait. It can be trained, strengthened, and turned into a habit. To illustrate this, Duhigg takes us inside Starbucks, one of the largest coffee companies in the world. Starbucks doesn't just serve coffee, it also trains its employees to develop willpower and self-control. Why? Because baristas often deal with stressful situations, angry customers, long lines, high-pressure mornings. If employees lose their temper, the brand suffers. So Starbucks built a system of training that helps workers respond calmly and consistently, even under pressure. For example, if a customer yells because their order is wrong, most people's instinct is to snap back. But Starbucks teaches baristas to fall back on habits. Employees rehearse routines for handling conflict, such as listening patiently, apologizing sincerely, and offering a solution. The company even created a program called the Latte Method: listen, acknowledge, take action, thank the customer, and explain what you've done. With enough practice, this becomes automatic. Instead of reacting emotionally, workers default to a calm, professional habit. The science behind this shows why it works. Psychologists discovered that willpower is like a muscle. It can get tired when overused, but it can also grow stronger with regular exercise. For example, people who build willpower by practicing small acts of discipline, like sticking to a budget or exercising regularly, often find that their self-control improves in completely different areas of life. A person who learns to resist cookies may also become better at managing deadlines or controlling spending. Duhigg gives the example of a study in which people were asked to build the habit of exercising. Even when participants only went to the gym once a week, they started smoking less, eating healthier, and working harder. Why? Because exercise strengthened their willpower muscle, which spilled over into other domains. But there's another layer: people are more likely to rely on willpower habits if they have a clear plan for how to respond to difficult situations. For instance, someone trying to quit smoking might decide in advance, if I feel the urge to smoke after dinner, I'll chew gum instead. This is called an implementation intention, a mental script that replaces old routines with new ones. Starbucks applies this principle in training. Baristas write down how they will react in stressful scenarios, so that when stress hits, they don't have to think, they follow the script. One of the most powerful examples Duhigg shares is about a young woman named Travis, who grew up in a difficult household filled with instability and addiction. As a teenager, he struggled with discipline and consistency. But after getting a job at Starbucks, he learned the routines of self-control the company taught. Over time, these habits spilled into his personal life. He became more responsible, more confident, and eventually used his new discipline to go back to school. Starbucks didn't just give him a paycheck, it gave him life-changing willpower habits. The lesson of this chapter is clear: willpower is the single most important keystone habit for success. People who strengthen their willpower don't just get better at one thing, they improve at many things at once. And the best way to build willpower is not to rely on raw determination, but to turn self-control into a habit, a set of routines you fall back on automatically when life gets tough. Remember, willpower is not an innate gift, it's a trainable habit. Companies like Starbucks have learned that when people rehearse routines for stressful moments, they turn discipline into an automatic response. Strengthen willpower in one area, and it spills into every part of life. Chapter 6: The Power of a Crisis: How Leaders Create Habits Through Accident and Design. Habits don't just shape individuals, they shape entire organizations. In this chapter, Charles Duhigg reveals how companies, institutions, and even governments can use crises as turning points to reshape the habits of their people. Often, a crisis exposes weaknesses that were ignored for too long. And in those moments of upheaval, leaders can step in to deliberately design new organizational habits. Duhigg begins with the story of Rhode Island Hospital, one of the best-equipped medical centers in the United States. On the surface, it looked like a model of modern healthcare. But beneath the reputation, dangerous habits were quietly festering. Doctors held near absolute authority, while nurses and staff were expected to follow orders without question. This hierarchy created an environment where mistakes were rarely challenged, even when obvious. The consequences were tragic. In one case, a patient came in for brain surgery. The medical team prepared the patient, but the surgeon insisted on operating on the wrong side of the head. Nurses noticed something was wrong but felt powerless to speak up. The operation went ahead, and the patient died. This wasn't an isolated mistake, it was the result of ingrained organizational habits. Crises like these often force organizations to change. After a series of similar tragedies, Rhode Island Hospital was pushed to re-evaluate its culture. Leaders implemented new systems that encouraged open communication, teamwork, and checklists. Nurses were empowered to challenge doctors when they spotted errors. The hospital began rehearsing new routines, much like individuals rehearsing new habits, until they became standard practice. Slowly, the culture shifted from fear and silence to collaboration and safety. Duhigg then turns to the corporate world, highlighting how companies often seize crises as opportunities. For example, during a financial scandal or a workplace disaster, executives may introduce sweeping reforms. People are more willing to accept change in a crisis because the old ways are no longer working. A crisis, in other words, creates a rare window where the organization's habits are malleable. Smart leaders recognize this and use the moment to embed new routines that will last long after the crisis passes. He also points out that not all crises are accidental. Some leaders deliberately manufacture crises to push through change. For example, in business, a new CEO might emphasize poor quarterly results or highlight inefficiencies to create a sense of urgency. By framing the situation as a crisis, they shake employees out of complacency and rally them behind new habits. This technique can be manipulative if abused, but when used responsibly, it can be a powerful catalyst for transformation. One fascinating insight from this chapter is that organizational habits are often invisible. Just as individuals run on routines without thinking, so do companies. From the way meetings are run, to how conflicts are handled, to how decisions are made, these are all organizational habits. And just like personal habits, they can either help the group thrive or drag it down. A crisis shines a spotlight on these habits, forcing people to see them clearly for the first time. The Rhode Island hospital case showed how a tragedy could spark reform. Other examples, like corporate turnarounds after scandals, demonstrate how leaders can either let a crisis destroy them or use it to rebuild stronger. In both cases, the key is the same: crises reveal the underlying habits of an organization, and leaders must seize that moment to redesign those habits deliberately. Crises, whether accidental or engineered, create rare opportunities for change. Organizations run on habits just like individuals, and in moments of crisis, those habits can be reshaped. Great leaders use crises to break destructive routines and replace them with healthier, more productive ones. Chapter 7: How Target Knows What You Want Before You Do, When Companies Predict and Manipulate Habits. If the first half of the book shows us how habits drive individuals, this chapter reveals something even more startling: how companies study our habits, predict them, and even shape them to influence what we buy. In the modern world, corporations don't just react to consumer behavior, they anticipate it, sometimes before we consciously realize what we want. Charles Duhigg illustrates this through the story of Target, one of the largest retail chains in the United States. At the heart of the story is Andrew Pohl, a statistician who was hired to figure out how Target could use data to better market products. The company had already been tracking customer purchases through credit cards, coupons, and loyalty programs. But Target wanted something more: the ability to predict life changes, like pregnancy, marriage, or moving homes, moments when shopping habits shift dramatically. Why focus on life changes? Because psychologists and marketers know that most of the time, people shop automatically, sticking to the same brands and stores. But during major life transitions, those habits become flexible. A new parent, for instance, is suddenly open to trying new products, new stores, and new routines. If Target could identify women who were pregnant before their competitors did, it could capture them as long-term customers. Pohl and his team began analyzing mountains of shopping data. They discovered that pregnant women often buy seemingly random products, like unscented lotion, vitamins, or large bags of cotton balls, long before purchasing baby-specific items. By combining dozens of such signals, Target created a pregnancy prediction score. This meant that the company could tell, with surprising accuracy, not only if a customer was pregnant but also her due date. The story gets even more fascinating and unsettling. In one famous case, a father marched angrily into a Target store near Minneapolis, demanding to know why his teenage daughter was receiving ads for baby cribs and maternity clothes. He accused the store of encouraging teen pregnancy. A few days later, he returned to apologize. His daughter was pregnant, and Target had figured it out before he had. This example highlights both the power and the danger of companies manipulating habits. Target had to learn to be more subtle. Instead of sending a customer a packet filled entirely with baby coupons, they began mixing them with random items, like lawnmowers or wine glasses. That way, the marketing felt less intrusive. Customers thought the ads were general promotions, but in reality, every coupon had been carefully chosen to align with predicted habits. Duhigg explains that this kind of habit prediction and manipulation is now common across industries. Grocery stores know when you're dieting. Credit card companies can identify when you're struggling financially. Online retailers, like Amazon, track not only what you buy but also how long you hover over an item before clicking. Each action becomes a data point, feeding into algorithms that predict and influence what you'll do next. The key reason this works is because consumers run on autopilot. Shopping is often a habitual process. We walk into a store, grab the same cereal, the same detergent, the same toothpaste, without thinking. Companies like Target exploit this by slipping new products into our routines. If you always shop on Wednesdays, Target might offer a discount that nudges you toward a new brand, and once it becomes a habit, you're hooked. But there's also an ethical question here: how far should companies go in predicting and manipulating our habits? On one hand, personalized marketing makes life convenient. Who doesn't like a discount on something they actually need? On the other hand, when a company knows something intimate about you, like a pregnancy or financial trouble, before your family does, it raises serious concerns about privacy and control. Duhigg doesn't suggest that all marketing is sinister, but he does highlight a truth we cannot ignore: our habits are valuable commodities. Companies spend billions to study them, shape them, and sometimes exploit them. Understanding how our habits are predicted and manipulated gives us power, the power to be more mindful consumers, rather than puppets of invisible algorithms. Remember, companies like Target have mastered the art of predicting customer habits, especially during life changes when routines are most vulnerable. By analyzing data, they can anticipate needs before customers are even aware of them. This power is both useful and dangerous, reminding us that if we don't understand our own habits, someone else will, and they'll profit from them. Chapter 8: Saddleback Church and the Montgomery Bus Boycott, How Movements Happen. So far, Duhigg has shown how habits shape individuals and organizations. In this chapter, he widens the lens even further, how habits shape entire societies and fuel movements. Social habits, he argues, are the glue that binds communities, spreads ideas, and sustains revolutions. To explain this, he weaves together two stories: the birth of Saddleback Church, one of the largest congregations in America, and the Montgomery Bus Boycott, the spark of the civil rights movement. Let's begin with the Montgomery Bus Boycott of 1955. It all started when Rosa Parks, a quiet, middle-aged African-American seamstress, refused to give up her bus seat to a white passenger in Montgomery, Alabama. Contrary to popular myth, Parks wasn't the first to resist segregation on buses. Others had done so before her, but their acts didn't ignite a movement. So why did Parks's arrest set off a chain reaction that changed the course of history? The answer lies in habits, specifically, the habits of friendship and community. Rosa Parks was deeply embedded in Montgomery's social fabric. She was active in her church, a member of community groups, and well known to a wide circle of friends and acquaintances. When she was arrested, her network immediately mobilized. People who knew her personally felt compelled to act. Within hours, word spread through churches, barbershops, and schools. What began as a circle of close friends expanded into a wave of social pressure and participation. But the movement didn't stop at personal ties. It grew because leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other activists tapped into broader social habits, routines of church attendance, neighborhood meetings, and weekly gatherings. They turned those existing habits into channels of resistance. Attending church wasn't just about worship anymore, it became a way to organize carpools, share news, and strengthen resolve. The boycott endured for over a year, not because every individual was fiercely committed every single day, but because habits kept the movement alive. Duhigg compares this with the story of Saddleback Church, founded by Pastor Rick Warren in California. Warren didn't build his megachurch by targeting the deeply religious. Instead, he sought out people who felt disconnected, newcomers, the lonely, those seeking community. His insight was simple but profound: people crave belonging, and once they join a group, they begin to adopt the habits of that group. At Saddleback, Warren created small, intimate groups within the larger church. Members gathered in living rooms, shared meals, and supported one another. Once they joined, they naturally began to adopt habits of regular attendance, Bible study, volunteering, and tithing. The church grew not because Warren forced new beliefs onto people, but because he created social habits that encouraged commitment. When people saw their friends participating, they followed suit, just as citizens of Montgomery did when they saw their neighbors walking instead of taking the bus. This chapter reveals a three-part pattern for how movements grow. First, they start with the habits of friendship and strong ties. Rosa Parks's friends supported her because they knew her personally. Second, they expand through the habits of larger communities and weak ties. Acquaintances and neighbors, connected through churches and organizations, felt social pressure to join. Third, they endure through new habits that reinforce shared identity. At Saddleback, small groups created new routines of belonging. In Montgomery, weekly church meetings and carpools sustained the boycott for over a year. Duhigg shows that this is why social movements succeed: they take advantage of the way humans are wired for habit. We imitate our friends. We conform to our communities. And when routines become tied to identity, I am a good Christian, I am part of the boycott, I am one of them, they grow nearly unbreakable. The Montgomery bus boycott didn't just end segregation on buses, it revealed the hidden power of social habits. Saddleback Church didn't just become a megachurch, it showed how communities grow when leaders harness the natural momentum of group routines. Remember, movements don't spread because of fiery speeches alone. They grow because of social habits, the routines of friendship, community, and shared identity. Change becomes contagious when it's woven into the everyday habits of people's lives. Chapter 9, The Neurology of Free Will. Are we responsible for our habits? The final chapter of The Power of Habit wrestles with a profound and unsettling question. If habits are hardwired into our brains, if they often run automatically without our conscious control, then to what extent are we responsible for them? Do we truly have free will, or are we prisoners of our routines? Charles Duhigg explores this question through two very different stories. The first is about Brian Thomas, a quiet, law-abiding man from Wales who did something unthinkable. One night, while sleepwalking, he strangled his wife to death, believing in his dream that she was an intruder. When he woke up and realized what he had done, he was devastated. In court, experts testified that he had been acting in a state of automatism, a condition where the brain performs complex routines without conscious awareness. The jury acquitted him, ruling that he wasn't responsible for his actions. The second story focuses on Angie Bachman, a woman from Iowa who developed a compulsive gambling habit. At first, she played casually at casinos. But over time, the habit loop, cue, routine, reward, tightened its grip. The lights, the sounds of slot machines, and the thrill of a near win created powerful cravings. Before long, she was spending entire nights at casinos, losing thousands of dollars. Eventually, she gambled away her family's entire savings, her inheritance, and fell into bankruptcy. Angie tried to argue in court that the casinos were partly responsible. They had encouraged her gambling, offering free trips, luxury perks, and personal attention to keep her hooked. In a way, they exploited the very science of habits, giving her cues and rewards that fed her craving. Yet, unlike Brian Thomas, the court ruled Angie was fully responsible for her actions. She lost her case, and her debts remained. Why the difference? Duhigg explains that the distinction lies in awareness and choice. Habits may be automatic, but once we recognize them, we have the ability, and the responsibility, to change them. Angie knew her gambling was spiraling out of control. She had moments where she could have sought help, cut up her casino cards, or stayed away. Though difficult, change was possible. Brian Thomas, on the other hand, had no awareness of his actions while sleepwalking. His brain acted entirely without his conscious participation. This raises an essential lesson: while habits are powerful, we are not powerless. Neuroscience shows that habits never truly disappear from the brain. Once formed, they can always be triggered. But we can reprogram them by inserting new routines and cultivating awareness. This is where free will comes in. We may not always choose our initial habits, but we can choose to recognize and reshape them. Duhigg ends the book by tying this idea back to his central message. Habits govern much of our lives, but once we understand the habit loop, cue, routine, reward, we gain the ability to change them. The responsibility lies in our hands. We can decide whether to let destructive routines control us, or whether to take deliberate steps to build habits that reflect who we want to be. Habits may be automatic, but awareness gives us power. We cannot always control the cues or the cravings, but we can control how we respond. Responsibility comes from the fact that, once we understand our habits, we have the ability, and the duty, to change them. Charles Duhigg closes The Power of Habit with a simple but life-changing truth: habits shape our lives far more than we realize. From the small routines that dictate how we brush our teeth, to the organizational practices that determine the success of companies, to the social habits that ignite entire movements, habits are the invisible architecture of daily life. We've seen how habits begin as fragile loops of cue, routine, and reward, but grow stronger when fueled by craving. We've seen how individuals can transform themselves by changing keystone habits, whether it's exercising, budgeting, or replacing destructive routines with empowering ones. We've seen how organizations like Starbucks and Alcoa harness habits to build cultures of success. And we've seen how societies, from the Montgomery bus boycott to the rise of mega churches, are moved not just by ideals but by shared, habitual behaviors that bind communities together. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: we are not helpless. Habits may be automatic, but they are not destiny. By becoming aware of the habit loop and deliberately reshaping it, anyone can take control of their routines. Responsibility comes from the recognition that, while we don't always choose our habits, we do choose whether to change them. Duhigg leaves us with hope. Change is possible. Transformation is possible. A single habit, changed in one person, can ripple outward into families, workplaces, communities, and even entire nations. That is the true power of habit. And that's the complete journey through the power of habit.